Thanks, Stephen. So we have 30 in the room, which is great. Welcome to Talking Towns. And this is an initiative for an online discussion and seminars set up by the UCD Centre for Irish Towns. It began in 2022 when it was curated by Dr. Sarah Cotterill and Katrina Devery. And this time it's curated by Stephen Wall and Dr. Anna Sakura. And thank you both for all the time in making this happen. I'm Miriam Fitzpatrick. I'm a researcher and an educator at UCD with a special interest in urban open space and the social life of towns and cities and streets. And I'm going to chair today. We have quite a busy lineup and we're here to discuss the Town Centre First initiative. This is one of a number of government initiatives which is to address the threat to the livability of Irish towns, something that I often refer to as our most vulnerable national heritage asset. This seminar is to understand what has been involved in the rollout of the Town Centre First policy, and we're lucky to be joined by Sharon O'Gara from the National Town Centre Office, and she will join us in the middle of the panel today. It's just 2 years into the establishment of the Town Centre First policy, and Sharon and 3 others in her office are working with town regeneration officers in every local authority around the country. And we at CFIT are curious as to how it's working out. So it's great to have you here to tell us a little bit about that. But also we've been joined, and we're going to set the scene with a little bit of backstory on the policy itself. Then we'll hear from Sharon, and then we're going to look at 4 different town centre urban design plans that roll out from this policy. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the policy, and you might know 2014, there was a change in how the governance structures of the country, I guess, with 3 regional assemblies were established, and at the same time, the 80 town councils that existed were restructured. And since then, several initiatives have followed to kind of patch the gap created at a local level. Co-founders who are here, Philip Crowe and Orla Murphy, who founded Centre for Irish Towns, carried out initial assessment of one of those programmes, which was the Town Centre Living Initiative, and that had 6 towns involved. And some of the recommendations of that great report, which is available online, have shaped policy that happened and is still happening. It was timely when they did that report because 2020, we might recall, was the last election. We had a coalition, and therefore there was an agreement between the coalition. A programme for government was put together, and a Town Centre First policy was added as an agreed line item between that group. And what does that mean? That means the town centre first for all development, not its edges, in case people wonder why that term. So it's a very quick way of capturing the intention. That was encouraged by work done by the Heritage Council on Towns, and which also looked to the Scottish town partnerships and the collaborative town centre health checks that were underway here. So that's a little bit of background on the policy, but I am going to turn to others who know more about it to discuss this. So we have a number of sessions, and we're going to open with Dr. Sandra Andrea O'Connell, who's Director of Architecture Communications at the RIAI. And that's because Sandra has done a master's on the background of the policy and compared policies in other European countries and in the UK. So we'll start with her. And I'll introduce you later because I'm just going to say afterwards, then we have several urban designs have been commissioned for a number of towns as part of the rollout of the policy. And we're going to hear about a few of those. Allies and Morrison architects are going to sum up their experience on 3 towns, and then we're going to have O'Mahony Pike, who are going to present 1 and some of the spin-offs that have happened from that. I want to invite everybody, as everybody speaks, to add your questions to the question box, and we'll deal with those at the end. So we're going to have sort of 10 minutes, and so we're going on a timely slot here. So I'll introduce Sandra, and then I'll let you You can begin to show your slides as you wish, Sandra, but Sandra, as I mentioned, is Director of Architecture and Communications at the RIAI, and she's also responsible for strategic communications and an active programme of members and public engagement. We might all know her from her regular writing on Irish architecture and urban issues. She edited Dublin by Design with Noel Brady, 9 volumes of the RIAI Annual Review. Well done. And I know I read you regularly in House Magazine, etc. So she did her master's at TU Dublin in 2022, and it's on the subject of, if I can call this out, Beauty First, an investigation into quality design outcomes for Irish towns and the role of the new Town Centre First policy at TU Dublin. So I'm going to ask you then to set the context, and as each person, I'm going to use the prompt to speak the bio to get the last person off the stage, as it were. So Sharon's going to follow. Thanks. Sandra.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and also to your colleagues in UCD Centre for Irish Towns for this invitation. It allowed me to relive my thesis, which was, an interesting experience going back in there. So I did my thesis on Town Centre First in 2022 when the policy had just been published, and I was looking particularly at governance structures and quality outcomes. So today I'm just going to share a few insights from this research on the policy background, the structures of the policy, and some of my recommendations. So here's the next slide. So it's not often that policy for Irish towns arrives. Town Centre First was published in February 2022, almost half a century since Patrick Shaffrey called for a dedicated policy to protect the character and quality of our towns. In his 1975 book, The Irish Town, An Approach to Survival, he criticised an attitude of, quote, urban euthanasia when the small town had no place in the planner's dream. He proposed a town conservation policy with practical design guidelines and encouraged his readers to study the plan, explaining that any interventions must be based on a thorough analysis of a town's origins, whether as a market, industrial, transport or resort town, its shape, fabric, amenities, and built heritage. Shaffrey then presented a typical town plan with all the positive attributes of, quote, a long main street, 2- and 3-story buildings with living accommodation overhead and shops to the street, but also the threats of vacancy, urban sprawl, and a poor relationship with amenities. In this typical Irish town, he writes, the river is practically ignored. He demonstrates how a sensitive interpretation of the plan would lead to good design outcomes by developing this town's long gardens, a legacy of the Norman burgage plots, into homes and amenities. As the crisis for towns continued, Shaffrey's plea for a policy-driven approach was taken up by generations of architects, from Valerie Mulvin and Neil McCullough, who argued in their 1983 book, A Lost Tradition, that the buildings of Irish towns, quote, lie at the very root of our identity, to Orla Murphy's Town, the work of the Free Market team who brought Irish towns to the Venice Architecture Biennale, and many others, including UCD Centre for Irish Towns, the Irish Architecture Foundation, and the RIAI, to name but a few. The last 2 decades, as Miriam mentioned, also saw the implementation of high-quality town plans, including the Westport 2000 plan and the Clonakilty 400 master plan. And both plans were delivered by town architects, in this case, Simon Wall and Julia Vallone, who were part of a town team alongside the town manager, planner, and engineer. These local town teams were lost during the 2014 Local Government Reform Act, which reduced local authorities from 114 to 31, replaced the 8 regional authorities and 2 regional assemblies with 3, and reduced the number of elected representatives. Research by Brennach et al. Has identified since 2014 a paucity of functions devolved to the regional and local levels compared with the norm in other European countries, where administrative structures are much more closely attuned to underlying socio-spatial structures, with Ireland coming second last in the 2014 Local Autonomy Index. While local authority architects continue their great work, albeit in different teams and structures, the loss of the town architect who oversaw design quality on the ground could be a challenge for Town Centre First. The Town Centre First is a really well-developed policy, and there are many positive aspects. It's cross-departmental. It was based, as Miriam said, on that research of Scotland's Towns Partnership. It set up pilot schemes, the Town Centre Living Initiative, and then it incorporated actions from that synthesis report that Miriam mentioned by Space Engagers, which reviewed these pilot schemes with several actions finding their way into Town Centre First. For example, the appointment of dedicated Town Centre officers who are now called Town Regeneration Officers. There's one difference, and that is instead of the report's recommendation for an independent Ireland's Town Partnership modelled on Scotland, the policy is led by the National Town Centre First Office, which sits within the local government management agency. And there are advantages and efficiencies to this, as it builds on existing relationships with local authorities and other government departments. Very commendable is also the policy's strong localized approach. So the local authorities are supported by the new TROs. The volunteer and multi-stakeholder town team is recognizing community knowledge and engagement, and the town plan is considered a collective vision underpinned by a clear diagnosis of local strengths and challenges, such as the town health check. And then recognizing that important learnings could be gained from case studies, the department launched prior to the policy launch this funding for 26 towns receiving 100,000 each, and you will hear more about some of those later in the talk. So now I'd like to share some of my findings and recommendations. So my research was based on structured interviews with stakeholders in town regeneration, and a shortage of architects in local authorities really came to the fore, especially in urban design, with many of these roles filled by engineers and others. The architectural skills shortage in local authorities could really impact the quality of the brief for the town plan and the design outcomes. As shown earlier, architects have a very relevant skill set, and we need to resource local authorities with more architects, especially with urban design skills. And their roles also need to be at senior level to provide design guidance to the TROs and the town teams. And the RIAI is currently undertaking a survey of architectural roles in the public sector, and on behalf of the National Policy on Architecture, and this data will be available in a few weeks' time. The TR role is currently administrative and does not require urban design skills. It should be considered perhaps to create a technical role alongside the TRO that would support design quality outcomes. And the composition of the town team, while it's multidisciplinary, it's also non-descriptive, and perhaps Town Centre First could fund an architect urban designer supporting a town team. And at regional level, there are excellent opportunities to strengthen the role of the regional assemblies who set regional, spatial, and economic strategies to address specific issues affecting a region. And these would be ideally placed, for example, to provide regional design guidance. There also needs to be stronger engagement with Irish and European policy. So Town Centre First and the National Policy on Architecture Places for People were published within months of each other, and both seek to develop design guidance and exemplars. Town Centre First, a new national toolkit, and the NPA, comprehensive national design quality criteria and best practice models. With limited capacity and resources in the public and private sector, the two policy objectives should be combined to arrive at one national set of design quality criteria for towns and larger centres. There also needs to be stronger engagement with key European policies affecting towns. The Davos Declaration on Baukultur, of which Ireland is a signatory, assesses the Baukultur of places through 8 criteria, including beauty, as an explicitly declared objective of any placemaking, planning and building activity to achieve a high-quality Baukultur. In the Baukultur vision, the quality of the entire built environment rather than individual buildings is imperative. And this is a great model for Irish towns, which are based on the ensemble rather than the individual, as Patrick and Maura Sheffley described so well in their 1983 book, writing, "In the Irish town, quote, shops, public buildings, banks and houses, some large, some small, are strung together like beads on a necklace." Another European initiative is the European Bauhaus, and that's based on the 3 principles of beautiful, sustainable, together. And there are fantastic opportunities for towns for funding, exemplars and prizes. And the project here in the middle just recently won an European Bauhaus Prize. It's in Sarajevo by RIAI member Selma Harrington and her colleagues, and it maps drinking water fountains, shares information via digital platform, and invites different stakeholders to care for this important public utility. So finally, just something on architectural design competitions, a big plea for those in town regeneration. It's a proven methodology to support towns in quality design outcomes. They are quality focused and create a wealth of innovative ideas. Competitions could be considered for specific projects arising out of a town plan, for example, the regeneration of a main street, a community hub, or a new public space. And important for successful competition are the strengths of the brief and the composition of the jury. Town Centre Living was a partnership between the RIAI, the Department of Housing, and 4 local authorities to find design solutions for social housing schemes in Castle Blaikie, Kildare, Roscrea, and Sligo. And they aligned with Town Centre First's objectives of compact growth and town centre revitalisation by way of delivering real projects which will provide almost 100 new social homes. Here are the 4 winners. On the other end of the scale, competitions can also be really suitable for small projects. Vorarlberg in Austria is an exemplary region that has successfully adopted the concept of Baukultur through collaboration between architects and the timber manufacturing sector, as well as strong public engagement. The region uses architectural design competition to drive design excellence. An architectural competition for new bus shelters in the village of Cormac has raised international awareness of Vorarlberg's rural Baukultur and gave visibility to the region's innovative mobility concept that connects small villages with each other and with the larger towns. And in this competition, 7 international architects were paired with local architects and craftsmakers, and their bus shelters continue to be destinations for hordes of architectural students and architects from all over the world to travel to this village to see them. So quality outcomes are really important for our towns. The plans we make today will shape their future. As Valerie Mulvin has reminded us in her book, Approximate Formality, the shapes of Irish towns are rooted in decisions and policies of the past, a product first of geography, then history. Thank you very much to Miriam and her colleagues for inviting me along today. And I have to give a big shout out to Dr. Sarah Rock, Dave O'Connor and the team at TU Dublin, and also to the RIAI who supported my research. Thank you very much, and I hope I was within the time.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for sharing your research and also from that depth of knowledge to bring some recommendations. So that's really what we're here to make happen at the Centre for Irish Towns. Also, just as a little prompt, saves me saying it later, but Talking Towns will continue in September, and we're going to pick up on the subject that you raised there of the competitions with the RIAI Town Centre Living competition, and we'll pick up on that in September. So next, between that background on the policy, some recommendations, we're going to turn to Sharon O'Gara, who is here as the project lead from the National Town Centre Office. And I'll just say a few little words about her. So she is coordinating the work of the town regeneration officers since 6 months. And she's with a team of 4, and some of them are here, and you're all very welcome. Sharon is a registered architect. She's a member of the RIAI with professional diploma in architecture, and she did a master's with me and our team in urban design at UCD. Sharon's also a member of the Academy of Urbanism and on the committee at the RIAI on the urban design. So thank you very much for joining us. Sharon is going to give us just a little bit of background on how the central office works and how the various satellites work in the local authorities. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks to the Centre for Irish Towns for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Town Centre First Office and Town Centre First plans. This is a screenshot of the homepage of the National Town Centre First website that was recently published. And there's a lot of information on the website, and it'll be continuously updated. So information around phase 1 and 2 towns, news and updates from the National Office, FAQs and useful links. So the useful links would have links to relevant policy, but also the wealth of I suppose, guidance information that's available around toolkits and guidance documents to support the Town Centre First Plan process. The policy has been previously mentioned, was published in February 2022. And in terms of the structure of the National Town Centre First Office, Mairead Hunt is the national coordinator, and Mairead is in the role about 18 months now. Donal Murchada is the project manager, Billy Sheehy is the project officer, and both Donal and Billy are in the role just about a year, and I started at the end of last year. As has been previously mentioned, there are 26 town regeneration officers in place across the country. And sorry now, I don't know if my screen has changed for you. Apologies. Has that worked? Sorry. So phase one towns, Town Centre First plans have been completed, and you can see the list of Town Centre First towns there. Sorry, so those plans are either completed or nearing completion, and where there are some small final edits to be completed on some of the plans, they'll be published and available to view. Phase two, Town Centre First plans was announced in February with funding of 4.57 million from DRCD. So that was to develop 26 Town Centre First plans across 26 new locations across the country. And also funding was made available for town team capacity building for 3 additional towns within the local authority area and project development measure. Just to briefly mention as well, Thrive funding of 7 million has been recently announced for local authority owned heritage derelict buildings. So this is funding to renovate disused heritage buildings in local authority ownership in cities, regional growth centres and key towns. And this funding also supports the Town Centre First policy in helping to transform town centres. It's worth mentioning as well that proposed projects should incorporate the core values of the new European Bauhaus, as mentioned by Sandra. So Town Centre First plans process builds on the excellent work of Alison Harvey and the Heritage Council on the collaborative health check, Town Centre Health Check. So that collaboration with communities and town teams, as well as the data-led, evidence-based approach, is at the heart of the Town Centre First plan process. Some Town Centre First towns would have had health checks completed, and Roscrea is a nice example of that, having completed a health check in 2012, as well as 2018. And when that has happened, there is an opportunity to do a comparative analysis, to revisit, I suppose, surveys, update data in collaboration with the town team, and to establish trends over that long timeline. The Roscrea Town Centre First plan, and I don't want to preempt too much of what will be said later, but it's a lovely example of a plan that incorporates urban design methodologies of analysis to complement the health check process. So the streetscape analysis is really comprehensive, looking at that lovely urban design street section, the space between buildings, street width, building height, looking at street enclosure, but it also included street continuity, street greening, topography, character, so really comprehensive analysis. There was also an analysis using Jan Geld's 12 quality criteria for assessment on the key public spaces within the Town Centre First plan boundary, so that observational analysis. So that analysis and more would have informed the Town Centre First plan in collaboration with the town team. So it's that process of analysis and appraisal in collaboration with the town team that underpins the co-design process that is part of the Town Centre First plan. And then just lastly, RIAI and Morrison have done beautiful work as well. So they, just to note, the 6 Mile Bridge, the collaboration with the town team started with a walkability audit, which in of itself is a really insightful analysis to carry out. It's very collaborative. You're working with the local access group, the accessibility officer within the local authority, the town regeneration officer as well. But also the age-friendly coordinator, the area engineer or town architect. And it was just a lovely way to start that collaboration with the town team and that insightful analysis. And then lastly, the sketch perspectives, some beautiful sketch perspectives showing the vision for the various towns. So thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. It's an exciting time, and I'm remembering I started while ago at CABE at a time like this when things are beginning to bubble up, and when research is really rich and you have a lot of very positive wind. So that's fantastic. We're now going to, and it will be on one town, and this is by our colleague Colin King, who teaches urban design at UCD and is an associate director at Matney Pike, and his colleague Cormac Murray, and they're sitting together there at a table, but just bear with me for a second. They both worked internationally. Colin is an urban designer, planner and architect in public and private sector, having worked in other countries, UK, Australia and Canada. And Cormac, just to summarise your CV, is an architect, has worked on the Ross Gray plan, is also a writer and is part of a collective that I regularly read called Type, and he also teaches at TU Dublin. He is also the editor of a book on the Dublin Architecture Guide, 1937 to 2020. Oh, 1937 to 2021. So thank you both, and sorry we're going to kind of push you towards the end here, but I'll let you go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Miriam. I'm going to rattle through my part of this because I think Cormac's is the more interesting, so we'll try to get there as quickly as possible. But thanks for the invite today, and thanks Sharon for the kind words earlier. It's really nice to actually present the work in, I suppose, the context of a collective effort, which hearing of Allies' work and hearing of the Sandra's talk earlier, you work on these plans and then you realise that it's not just a policy. There's actually collective thinking going into this, and it's really nice to hear some of that. So in terms of how we're going to split this today, I'm going to try keep to the kind of larger strategic aspects of it. Cormac is going to talk to the projects in more detail, and like I say, I'm going to try get to Cormac's material as quickly as we can. So for those who aren't familiar with Ross Gray in Tipperary, this is an aerial view of the centre of the town as it is at the moment, kind of looking from the southwest. If you can see my cursor, this is Castle Street. We have, the main attraction of the town, which is the fantastic castle and the OPW gardens behind it. So this is kind of the southern boundary of that central block. In the foreground here, running up forming the western boundary, is the main street, which is the main trading street at the moment, and you can see the remnants of the burgage plots that were mentioned earlier, and there's a laneway structure that actually exists within this, and similarly carries through that block on the west and leads you into this kind of central area behind the block here. There's a plaza space in there. There's public car parking, and quite interestingly, this kind of historic block, these two frontage of it, kind of act to screen the big box retailing that where in a lot of towns we saw the big boxes go out to the roundabouts at the edge of town. This was actually fairly forward thinking in placing that behind the screen of the historic town. It does mean that as you move up kind of east and north, the town kind of falls away and starts to leak there because somewhere has to be back of house, somewhere has to get the services in. So on the eastern side here then, the old centre of the town used to be up here where you see the tower and some of the other historic assets that are left. And then there's a river which doesn't quite come through on any of the aerial photographs, but a river runs up the eastern side and comes back in the centre, changes its name a number of times along the way. Then as we move north up here, there's the old antigen factory, there's a meat processing plant, and there is a still active train station to the north. So this kind of, as Miriam said earlier, town centre first, develop the town centre first, and then think about other aspects of it. This is really the core area of consideration for our plan. So this gives you the full kind of walking distance that we considered, 10 minutes from the centre. And again, the main considerations being these areas that you see with the dots on them there, which are all clustered around that area I've just described. Train station up here at the north. So, as part of the process, I think we have a sense from, as it's been described earlier, how the process for town centre first plans work in terms of what the policy demands of it. So one of the things that I wanted to call out in this, I suppose, is some of the advantages that we saw in our experience of the town centre first plan. So I think we were quite lucky, and I'm not sure how common it was across the other 25 towns in the first call out, But the Town Centre First plan was being done in parallel to an LAP. So we had the benefit of the material like the Town Centre Health Check, as been mentioned before. We also had material that was emerging, analysis that was fresh and emerging from the LAP processes, as well as our own design team that included KPMG Future Analytics as planning, engagement, economic analyses, a KSN for costs and urban movement for public realm. They had the ability that while we were generating our own new baseline reports, they could also interact with the team led by Sharon Scully, Tipperary County Council. And that was really fruitful. I think both projects, both the LAP and the Town Centre First plan, benefited from the fact that they could each, essentially shade in each other's corners where they needed to. So both projects, I would hope, benefited from being run in parallel. And I suppose the mention of the collaboration with Tipperary County Council probably brings, one of the other great benefits of the plan to mind, which was the assistance of the Town Regeneration Officer. And I don't think it's any stretch to say Anya McCarthy was ours, and she was central to the process. I'd say specifically the collaboration between Cormac and Anya was central to it. There is often a fear as practitioners when you come across new policies. I mean, we've had clients say to us before, you never want to be first, you want to go second on anything new that comes out, because the first time you do anything, you have to work out all the, the creases and the corners of it. But Anya had a very clear sense of what Town Centre First would do, what we needed to do to fulfill that, and the kind of collaborations that we needed. As a result, we got really, really clear direction from the client. The clarity of that direction meant that we could spend more time thinking, more time doing the design work that we were being hired to do, and that the entire design team were actually given that freedom to do the work. So that was crucial, I think, to it. So some of the analyses, they're as we'd expect, the vacancy and dereliction studies. Like I say, the fresh studies of car parking movement in the town that were coming out of the LAP, which meant that very, very early on we could establish that, for instance, with the parking, there was always at least 20% parking free in the town. And this kind of stuff is very, very important. We've done a lot of work over the years. I mean, back to Delaney, McVeigh and Pike, James Pike had done a lot of work in Tipperary. He continued through it on Manny Pike in the likes of Dunshaughlin, that we've done a lot of work in smaller towns. And we recognise how important, how fundamental these things are. So actually having access to that information very early on made the process a lot easier. The other thing that I think really worked well, and again, a lot of the credit to that goes to Anya's contacts and being able to facilitate that collaboration with the council, but also the town team. So I put this image up because very, very early on, I suppose, in our discussions with both in the wider engagement with the community, the formal public consultation events, the town team training that we undertook, Roscrea's identity as a market town was very fundamental to any work that we were going to do. So this image, which is the junction of Castle Street and Main Street, back when all the market infrastructure was still in the town, became something that we would return to an awful lot, because we were trying to get to a very concise vision that we could then break down into these 5 themes, under which, as we started to look at the various spatial projects and various other initiatives, we could always bring them back to the theme and get that back to something which was a short and workable vision that the town could get behind. And you'll notice that ends with the prosperous market town. That was fundamental to it. We established that very early as being a key consideration of the identity of the town, and we did that through the public consultation. So in terms of how we actually got to what the projects would be, which is what Cormac's going to talk through, we obviously, from our own baseline, we came in with our ideas as architects, as planners, as transportation specialists. We had a certain number of ideas that we brought in, but with the town team, we were able to get to about 80 separate projects that over time, there was a collective memory of people having brought forward. Some of these are very small, like, site-specific, hyper-local ideas for interventions. And what it enabled us to do is we kind of got that bag full of good ideas. We added our own to it. And then because of the clarity of the direction that we had, we were able to spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what exactly are these 80 projects? Because that's too much. that's too much for a town to take on and for a town team to take on. So can we bring some clarity to it? And what we started to do was look at these and realize that some of these 80 projects are just specific instances of a wider strategy, and we could use our team's thinking to understand what that strategy was. And once you had a number of those projects grouped into spatial strategies, you'd realize, well, actually, there are different facets of another wider spatial strategy. And that starts to narrow down what the projects are. And we started to be able to look at them in this, this is a cleaned up version of the kind of matrix that we had in terms of, high priority, high impact, relatively easy to deliver projects. And on a sliding scale of that, what could we get to the projects we would be recommending to the town team? This is what, if you're trying to make a difference, these are the projects you should take on. So it got us down to, about 15 projects, 13 to 15 projects that we thought these are absolutely what the town should do next. 10 to 11 of those being quick wins.
Could I interrupt and just say we only have 5 minutes left. I'm sorry,
Sure.
we've run beyond our time.
My last slide then for Cormac. So this is just to say, in terms of the town centre first, while we don't have key performance indicators, the great advantage of town centre first as we see it is that at the moment a difficulty is when you're working, at various urban scales, people want to see projects that work at their scale. So if you're in Dublin or Cork and you're talking about Lisbon or Vancouver or wherever it might be, they're not that interested. They want to see Irish examples. If you're working at the secondary or tertiary urban scale, people aren't interested in Irish examples from cities. They want to see something at a town scale, and we don't have that. But if each of these 26 towns in the first call out, 26 in the other two, if each of these delivers a couple of projects in the next couple of years, we'll very soon have 50 examples that we can bring out in public consultation, that we can show to people you can do this in the Irish context. And the iterations of the health checks are going to show how they work. So we think it's a really exciting prospect. Delighted to be involved in one. I'll hand over to you.
Yep, and just conscious of time, I won't linger on this too much, also because some of it was covered earlier. But I suppose just one observation is relative to the map we saw earlier of all the towns. It's interesting when you take off the county boundaries and just look at how many of these towns are connected by rail, how many of them are kind of clustered together. So at the moment, by my account, there's 8 that are serviced by an active train station, and at one stage in the 20th century there was 20 of them. Just more of an observation, I suppose, on Ireland's rail infrastructure. But that was a reason we were from the outset very interested in Roscrea, also in that it's the 7th largest of the towns in the first call out, so it's kind of a medium-sized town, which we saw a lot of opportunity in. So we'll just do a quick fly through some of the proposals, and it's very interesting to see a lot of the same stuff coming up from Ali's and Morrison's very interesting presentation there. But Castle Street, as we mentioned earlier, I think we have to give huge credit to Urban Movement, our team members from the UK, who did a lot of analysis on the placemaking and the traffic and movement on the town, and also KPMG Future Analytics, who in our proposals for Castle Street and Main Street in particular, they would have prepared cost-effective analysis and cost-benefit analysis on actually what would be the economic benefits and impact of these proposals. So we kind of had hard figures to kind of compare to the more sort of soft touch, I suppose, placemaking components. And I suppose it's about enabling that heritage that the locals of Roscrea were so keen to kind of reignite, which is, actually facilitating markets. There's a number of splintered sort of markets happening ad hoc throughout the town across the month. And as part of the Urban Realm Works 2 Castle Street, we were proposing that actually facilities would be in place to host them for one-off street festivals and monthly or bi-monthly market facilities. And then also we would have engaged with the OPW who are based in Roscrea Castle and Damer House there upon how to kind of create, I suppose, a welcome mat to that piece of heritage. It's obviously a huge asset that Roscrea has. Similarly, very interesting, Sandra pointed out the comment by Patrick Shaffrey there on how a lot of Irish towns turned their back on rivers, and certainly had been the case historically in Roscrea. The river, in fact, has 3 names, the Bunno, the Moneen and the Mull, depending on where you are in the town. But you can see here just beside that large Tesco that we saw in the aerial that there's quite a defensive relationship to the river. So we were proposing public realm interventions that would open up that access to the river with a series of pavilions or jetties that actually could create what we call the Roscrea River Rooms. And we're delighted this project is already funded for up to detailed design under the Outdoor Recreational Infrastructure Fund. So that would be one of the first projects that kind of gets underway as part of the Roscrea Town Centre First Plan. Then similarly, we actually also consulted with a range of people, but one of the more interesting conversations was the RIAI, because there's this quite large pharmaceutical campus within the town centre, within our 10-minute walking distance, which used to be an antigen factory and is now derelict and vacant. And really just from conversations with the RIAI and work that we've done with them previously, there was sort of an emphasis on actually, there is quite a lot of housing stock available in Roscrea. What really we would need to do is placemaking measures to make people want to relocate to this area. So what we were proposing in tandem with that idea of a river, sort of the river rooms in the Greenway, was actually to make public realm measures across the antigen site to actually open up along the river in areas that actually already were a flood zone, and then also opportunities for vibrancy and activation of the existing buildings there with different facilities, cultural and arts and cafes and the like, to actually make this more accessible. Great advantage of this is that it links directly to Roscrea rail station that we'd hope actually would have an increased service as part of our engagement with the Irish Rail. And just that's not giving any of those projects the time they need really, but kind of just conscious that everyone has to get back at 2. But really this aerial image kind of talks about the existing town. And just one figure I'd like to point out, that in addition to all the data that we had, something we found quite telling was Urban Movement analysed every square metre space outside of buildings in this town in the public realm, and they found that 79% or 80% was given over to car infrastructure, traffic, and parking, and 20% was given back to pedestrians cycling or sitting, dining spaces like that. They also have a data set that they compare that to other towns across the UK, so it was quite interesting to get that analysis. And then in tandem with what we know about the usage of parking, a lot of our plan was based around public realm interventions, landscaping and greening. So you can see those projects that we talked about, the Roscrea River kind of wrapping around here, the antigen site activation, the Lord's Road Master Plan as it's called, and Castle Street. And just from conversations with the local authority there, as Colin mentioned, like we were blessed with really engaged town team and town regeneration officer, and there's also been great momentum in Roscrea with projects like the Town Centre Living that Sandra mentioned, and North Tipperary Development Company's REACH project. So we are expecting that by later this year, up to 5 projects on this list are substantially developed. One has secured funding already, and then I think there's 2 more. The Castle Street funding application has been made, Glebe Park funding application has been made, Gantley Street Master Plan is underway with the Town Centre Living and already upgrades to the street there. The Roscrea Smart Town is going to be driven by this REACH Communities Enterprise Hub that's actually in place there. So people can actually see that this is starting to move at pace, and it's a great testament to the amount of work that went into this, that it sort of is a framework then for implementation, both on the very large scale, I suppose, for kind of multi-million projects, but then also just on a much smaller scale for town team driven engagement and information.
So Cormac, I'm going to, if you stop your slides, I'm just going to allow anybody who needs to leave at 2 o'clock to do so. And if it's okay with the speakers, we will stay on just to take a question or 2. Does that make sense? Sorry, we have had such a rich array of towns, presentations and aspects, but it's really great to end up there with a lot of these projects now getting further funding. And so it's snowballing into a bigger type of project. We have just a little interference on the sound. Anna, could you mute everybody? And then if anybody has a question, to pop it into the thing. I'll just make an observation. I thought Peter mentioned rationalising car parking in Irish towns. I thought that would be a really great book. And I saw that O'Mahony Pike was ending with that, with 80% of the public realm space been taken over with car parking. So I thought that was a fantastic kind of connection, and one we're all very aware of. Stephen, do you want to manage any of the questions? And Are there any?
Yeah, sure, Miriam. We have one in from Orla Murphy. I might just quickly read it out if Orla's happy with that. So thank you for the super presentations. With reference to Sandra's mention of the RIAI Town Centre Living Competition and the significant potential of towns to support residential reuse, have any of the teams looked at identifying potential for housing and reuse of existing vacant buildings and brownfield sites for residential use as part of the town plans they worked on?
Orla, I can probably briefly answer that just from my perspective, having reviewed the Town Centre First plans. Yes, a large number of them do. So living above the Baileyburgh is a really lovely example of looking at vacant buildings and living above the shop and ground floor use, etc. But also a number of the plans would look at backland development for new residential interventions within the existing urban block, etc., as part of the overall plan. So yes, I would say that is something that's looked at.
It would be wonderful that the next round of competitions might look at that, how to retrofit for housing. And I know Orla's done a lot of student projects on that over the years. If there's one more question, maybe, or it's been fantastic. Yeah.
Sorry, Miriam, we have another question in the chat from Philip Crow. How do we maintain the momentum that is evidently built up on the Town Centre First?
I would say a great start is having more events like this, because just actually sharing the information. I know a lot of it has been sort of centralized now on the Town Centre First website, which is brilliant, kind of having all the plans together. But it's about actually, as Colin was mentioning, sort of having this database or this collection of information that we can demonstrate how it's working in similar sized towns across the country, I think will really beget further similar work. And that was our kind of experience, in that we were sort of constantly looking for similar sized towns in the UK and elsewhere, which is quite difficult to do at that kind of scale. So this is just really heartening to see, particularly in those examples from Malleys and Morrison, to see that level of detail on that kind of consistency across the plans as well, you know.
I don't want to add to Sharon's already incredible workload with all the towns, but I think some sort of a roadshow would be maybe fantastic. A Town Centre First roadshow, where a Town Centre First might be coming to your town, and if you haven't done a plan yet, maybe sharing some of the plans, bringing some of the architects and speakers in, and talking to the town team as they're about to get together. So I think that might be a really good idea to keep momentum going for other towns in Ireland as well.
Stephen, the final question you want to ask?
Yes, we have a question from Tim Dowling here. Tim has introduced himself as an architect working closely with community groups and has found dealing with the local council quite difficult in terms of active participation and collaboration. Do you have any advice on how to improve this process?
This might roll us into our next seminar. That's a very large question, but go ahead.
Sorry, Miriam, I just might respond quickly. Make contact with the Town Regeneration Officer if you haven't already. I think that would be the first step. And if there's any architects as well working within the local authority, make contact, or through your local councillors as well, maybe just to get the names of who might be able to assist with, the particular area of concern. Thanks.
Thank you.
So just maybe, Miriam, we have one final question that might be more quick to answer from Robert Burke, and maybe Sharon, you might have an opinion on this. Do the speakers think there is a scope for smaller architectural practice to be involved in this kind of work?
Absolutely. Absolutely, no question. Yeah.
Okay.
But presumably that in that question is, are there currently roadblocks to small practices applying and doing the work?
I suppose sometimes that can come back to tender thresholds, etc. But I don't believe that would present an issue in this particular round. The funding is lower, I suppose, than it was last year. I think if architects were to contact Town Regeneration Officers, make it known within their county that they would be interested in working in this space, I think that would be so helpful.
That's good to know. Great. And on the roadshow, I'm also thinking of, I participated in the Town Centre health checks, and they were always a collaboration with the educational institution. So I think also somewhere in the background with our 6 schools of architecture around the country, we ought to tap into that as another resource in this discussion. I'm going to call it to a close just in the interest of time, but not because there's a lot more to be said, but it's really been inspiring to see the great energy, work, reflection, intelligence, and design to the forefront of ways to solve Irish towns. So I'd like to thank each of you, Sandra for opening and setting historical context and some comparative analysis, Sharon for giving us the kind of up-to-date where things are in terms of dynamics on the ground. Imogen and Peter, thank you very much for a very beautiful set of drawings and proposals, and Cormac and Colin for your work and how it's snowballing into lots more projects. So thanks finally to Stephen and Anna for making this happen. And if anybody has questions or ideas for future seminars, please drop a note to the Centre of Irish Towns. But also just say finally, we will be rolling this again in September, October, November, Talking Towns, first Thursday usually of the month. But thanks everybody for today. Thanks for our 60 or so that we had in attendance. Thank you guys.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. I'll just stay on with you, Stephen, just at the end.
Thank you, Miriam.
To say thank you very much. You can stop your recording, I guess.
Yeah, I actually can't. I'm not sure why. My internet connection was interrupted. So when I came back to the call, the recording was still